On behalf of Copenhagen FinTech, welcome to this info meeting about our FinTech Academy. Yeah, we did some iterations on the concept, and we will probably do some more when we get some feedback from you guys. I have a little bit of knowledge because they're really doing some really interesting and awesome stuff. The Innovation Center in Silicon Valley. I have been talking to them for quite some time. Actually, my own wife participated in the program back in 2015 with her startup, and went through the week of pitching to investors and meeting corporates and all the stuff. And I remember, Anders, already at that time you were talking about doing verticals also for the academy, and then we started last year actually talking about it could be cool to do a FinTech vertical. And since then, the guys at the Innovation Center started working on the idea, and we pitched in with some feedback on it. And now we are at a stage where we think now we're pretty much ready to launch the thing. But it's not so finalized that we cannot get some feedback from you guys. And I think one of the ideas also behind the program here that evolved was to do it with corporates and startups together. I don't know, have you actually done that before, Anders, or is this the first time?
This is the first time.
Okay, I think that's going to be even more interesting. That actually you also from home mix the two worlds. I think that's going to create some really interesting dynamics. So it's going to be both corporates and startups from Denmark, but also meeting investors, corporate startups from the US. So this is one of the things we really want to do because we know that we already got the two first sign-ups, Spar Nord and Sopra. So that's a check mark, first sign-ups. And also we know from many of the startups that we talk to here that, of course, Denmark is not interesting alone. So many of the startups want to scale from the start. But Denmark is a nice launch pad. So this is one of the programs we're doing. We're doing some other programs later in the year, also with India and talking to many other places, but not as structured and not as finished as what you guys have been doing for the last many years. So I think that was my introduction, Anders, and then I will give the word to you.
Thanks, Thomas. Welcome to this introduction of the FinTech Academy. My name is Anders Christjansen, and I'm working for the Danish Innovation Center in Silicon Valley. I have a background having worked as CEO of the company, FTTH company WOW, which I led from the startup up through the first 4 years. Prior to that, I've been working as deputy CEO of TDC Mobile and a number of startups and larger companies around Europe. And I moved to Silicon Valley around 3.5 years ago, and I've been working as an advisor, board member, and also interim CEO of an ad tech startup over here. So again, welcome to this introduction to our FinTech Academy. Just a little bit about the presentation and practicalities now that we have you guys in Copenhagen, and we have 5 or more actually participating via GoToWebinar. Let's take the questions at the end, and then the guys participating on GoToWebinar. I don't know if any of you are on your mobile. You can choose the view of the screen with the presentation by sliding right on the mobile and slide left if you want to see the video feed from Copenhagen and actually myself here. So we'll take questions at the end. And thanks, Thomas, for the introduction. I think it's really important for us to have a partner in Copenhagen. And now that we are working with FinTech, I couldn't imagine a better partner than Copenhagen FinTech. So thank you very much. I'd like to go through an introduction to the Innovation Center. So those of you who don't know us yet, get a bit of information. Then we'll go into information about Silicon Valley, and then talk about some of the trends in FinTech. And please do ask questions as mentioned You guys are specialists in FinTech, and if there are questions or comments, please add in. And at the end, I'll introduce the actual FinTech Academy to you. So starting out with the introduction to the Innovation Center, we are, as it's written on the bottom of the screen here, a partnership between the Ministry of Higher Education and Science and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. We have a number of centers around the world. The largest, and actually the first, is the one in Silicon Valley. We're based in Palo Alto, and we have a total now of 27 employees. So quite a large center, and we're working on what we call 5 different platforms. So we're working with what is called Invest in Denmark, aiming at securing foreign investments into Denmark, and having been successful in getting both Apple and Facebook to make large data center investments in Denmark. Then we have our R&D arm working with universities in America. So we actually have the Danish embassy's science attaché in our office. And besides making those agreements, he has also struck an agreement with the Lundbeck Foundation to make a combined learning and entrepreneurial startup program called the $10 Challenge for postgrad students on studying medicine. The third leg is Denmark Bridge, which has very much been driven by Vækstfonden, or the Danish Growth Fund, and some of the very large companies in Denmark, some of the largest companies, aiming at building a network for these top executives and some of the top executives here in Silicon Valley. And on the bottom you have the 2 platforms where we provide services to Danish companies. We have the Explore It platform aimed at the larger companies, and Scale It. And we have these 130 companies having gone through the Scale It program, and around 30 corporates over the past 2 years. What characterizes Silicon Valley is this fantastic ecosystem of both startups and large companies, and having been in existence for over the past 30 years. And this is a model taken from, I believe it's Accenture, describing how entrepreneurs go on this journey of the hill described here of the funding rounds, starting with angel funding, going to institutional rounds, and then going into IPOs. And the point of that being that both entrepreneurs and money is recycled into the system, and that's something that has been happening over 30 years or more, meaning that this is a very, very solid foundation for an ecosystem here. But besides that, there are other things making Silicon Valley super interesting. And again, those of you who have visited Stanford will know this is a fantastic place. And what's super impressive is that they have more than 50 living Nobel Prize winners. So what's really unique about Silicon Valley, besides the universities, the weather, the ecosystem, is also the growth of the unicorns, the companies having gained a valuation of more than 1 billion. If you take a look at this slide here, you'll see that it's getting very, very crowded. You have the traditional, the ones you've heard about, the Airbnbs, the Palantirs, Dropbox, etc., even Klarna out of Scandinavia. But over to the right, you see the number of startups that have gained this or joined this unicorn club. It's getting quite crowded. We'll get into some of the numbers later. Silicon Valley. So you make a number of analyses of the ranking, and I think you have 3 big cities in Silicon Valley. You have Oakland, you have San Francisco, and San Jose. And if you look at them in terms of, for example, GDP per capita, San Jose is number 1, San Francisco is number 4. And if you take other metrics, such as patents per capita, San Jose is number 1 and San Francisco number 3. Venture capital, the 2 cities are number 1 and 2 in the world, making it quite unique. Summarizing this in terms of the global startup ecosystem, then you'll see, to no surprise, that Silicon Valley is number 1. And actually it's US cities in the first 4 places, and the first outside of US city is Tel Aviv on a 5th place, and you have London following Tel Aviv, then Chicago, and the second European city is Berlin. Another way to look at this is to use I think a super interesting analysis for a number of reasons. So that's ranking the different regions, and this is only the US, based on growth companies. And the reason this is interesting is that it's actually an analysis made by Wealthfront, and this is a fintech company in the robo-advisory space. So they're doing this, they call it the career launcher, because they take this holistic view of their customers, and they help them not only to grow their financial wealth, but also help them growing their market potential as employees. So they make this recommendation to them about growth companies where they could go to work. And these companies that they list are companies that have a revenue run rate between 20 and 300 million, and a growth rate in excess of 50% over at least 3 to 4 years, and as a third point, compelling unit economics. And what's interesting is that the Bay Area, combining both San Francisco, San Jose, and to some degree Oakland, has 61% of all these companies in the US. And as a distant number 2, you have New York with only 10%. Even more interesting is that the Bay Area is actually the only region in the US that has seen growth among these companies from 16 to 17. So I think that pretty much describes the strength of Silicon Valley. Let's move into the venture capital arena and taking a look at the venture capital invested across the 3 major regions of the world. And you'll see that you have the Americas as a clear number 1 in terms of venture capital, but we have seen a decline in investments with a peak in 2015. And as a number 2, we have Asia, where the decline has been, actually it has not even been a decline, it's just flattened out the growth. And then Europe on a 3rd place. And on the next page, you'll see the number of deals, and it essentially shows the same trends, even though it shows that there is a steeper decline, indicating that the deal sizes have grown from 15 to 16. Looking into the actual fintech venture capital investments, and this is showing the investments on a quarterly basis from Q1 12 up to Q4 16. And as you see, there has been a peak in 2000 and in the quarters in 2015, but the level is quite high still within fintech. So it's a sector which seems to be growing more than other VC sectors. And if we look at the large deals of the fintech investments in the world, so these are the deals that are more than $50 million, you'll see that the US dominates and still does. And in this deal size, there actually only Europe and Asia have been represented over the past 4 quarters, or 4 quarters. And back in Q4 15, there were 2 European companies getting this amount of capital. So this is zooming in on the unicorns within fintech, and again listing them for Asia, the US, and Europe. And here you will see that there are more European companies represented, but the largest valuation companies, they are from Asia and from the US. And you have someone like Lucom, an online lender, Stripe, also in the payment space. You have some insurance tech, SoFi, social finance, very much with the same approach as I was describing that Wealthfront has, taking this broader responsibility for their customers and just the financial wealth. An interesting development is the continued interest from major banks to invest in FinTech. This is also one of the reasons why we want to experiment mixing our Explore It and Scale It platforms into FinTech Academy, because we do see this very large amount of investments from major banks going into VC-backed FinTech companies. And what's interesting here is that there are actually a number of European banks involved. The most active bank is Citigroup, but the second one is actually Banco Santander from Spain, and you also have BBVA, you have ING, UBS, so a number of European banks besides the American and Asian banks. And this slide is a little bit busy, so let me try to explain. I've used it before, but I think it describes a very important trend within FinTech, and that is the trend of the investments going from more narrow-minded, disruptive business models or competitive business models, as it's described here, to more collaborative business models. So overall, in the middle two bars, you see the total amount of investments, and this is not just VC investments, these are FinTech investments overall. And so first of all, you see the growth from 2010 to 2015, and secondly, you see the split between what is collaborative and what is competitive. And you see the share of collaborative-oriented business models that are being invested in take a larger share, growing from 40 to 60% from 10 to 15. And what's interesting then, if you split this into Silicon Valley and New York, you will see that the same trend both in Silicon Valley and in New York, but the nature of the businesses in Silicon Valley seems to be more oriented towards the competitive or disruptive business models, whereas New York traditionally, probably due to their traditional focus on existing banks, is more oriented towards the collaborative model. So let's look into the 4 areas that we traditionally look at when looking at the FinTech trends: the lending, the payments, the wealth management, and blockchain. We wanted to add a 5th, which is called neobanks. We didn't do it for now, but we'll probably do that going forward. And just overall, you saw the trend of VC investment going down in terms of overall investments. And if you look at these 4 areas, the relative, the 2 areas with relative strength, that's wealth management and payments, whereas lending and blockchain is relatively depressed compared to the other 2 areas. And if you take the lending area, and I've just taken the total loan issuance from Lending Club here, they have reached almost $25 billion in loans. The development of Lending Club follows pretty much the trend mentioned before, going from competitive to collaborative models. So you see this company having been a marketplace with a 2-market approach, peer-to-peer, both on the loan and the borrowing side, moving more and more towards a hybrid model where the loans are funded by the traditional banking system and the borrowers are acquired on their marketplace. And on the payment side, we have not seen a decline. We've actually seen more or less a stable development, and this is where Stripe, as one of the unicorns, is represented. Blockchain, on the other hand, you have seen a decline in investments. What we've seen also is this development of an entire blockchain ecosystem. And for those of you, I can imagine there are more of you following this very closely. A very interesting announcement came out earlier this week or late last week about Ripple being part of the Bank of England accelerator. Finally, we have the investments and wealth management area. And in this sector, you also have an entire ecosystem developed. This is actually one of the areas that has grown And 2016 was a record year for this area with a total of 74 deals, an amount of $657 million invested into this. That concludes the introduction to the Innovation Center, to the Silicon Valley, and to some of the trends in the FinTech area. Now, I have the pleasure of introducing you to the FinTech Academy on an introductory level. FinTech Academy is a collaborative learning journey for a mix of startups and corporates. The participants will have the opportunity to listen in and have dialogue with some of the tech leaders from Silicon Valley, and for a full week of Silicon Valley immersion. And specifically for the corporates, there will be an opportunity for a behind-the-scenes learning jointly with the Danish startups, but also some of the US startups. We will be inviting some of the FinTech startups who have gained significant funding to see what can be learned from them from the corporates. And there will also be an opportunity to get to know some of the corporates already operating here in Silicon Valley. For the startups, there will be the opportunity to look into the scaling of the business globally. That's essentially the basis and the premise for the Scale It program. And companies working out of Silicon Valley do not just have a US focus, they have a global focus. And there will be an opportunity to be challenged on the basic or more specific value proposition that you wish to work with on the Silicon Valley Immersion Week. For both parties, there will be an opportunity to connect with potential partners and strike potential partnerships. So that's the high-level introduction. And the way we want to do this, that's via a series of webinars. In this series of webinars, there will be the opportunity via GoToWebinar to have to listen in and to have dialogue with some of the Silicon Valley thought leaders. And the first guest we have confirmed on our list of participation is Beirut Shad. And Beirut is a super interesting gentleman who is not only the founder and CEO of Gopshop, which is a voice interface centric company, so enabling voice applications on devices like Google Home and Amazon Echo. So he's not only the CEO of that and is a total hands-on engineering type working in this space, but he's also the former VP and founder of Elance. And for those of you who've been around, you probably know Elance as this marketplace for contracting IT support and IT development resources globally. Very, very interesting guy to meet. And the way it works is that Beirut is coming to our office, and we'll do what we call a webinar fireside chat. First, Beirut will have the opportunity to introduce himself, and then there will be the opportunity for me to ask questions and for the participants to enter into the dialogue via GoToWebinar. As our second confirmed speaker, we have Danny Lange, and I think you might already know of Danny Lange. Super interesting tech guru working currently for the Danish-founded Unity Technologies as VP of Artificial Intelligence and Machine Learning. He had the position as head of machine learning with Uber before this. And what's interesting is this is a quite small community, and he's actually worked with one of our next speakers in his prior role in Microsoft. So we're very much looking forward to inviting Danny to this webinar fireside chat, and then the possibility of you to interact with him. Then we're very proud also to have gotten Stanford University confirmed as contributors to the FinTech Academy, and that'll be Bani Banerjee from the Stanford Design School, who will be joining in with a discussion about some of the latest developments and insights about design thinking. Again, I don't know how many of you know Benny, but a very interesting professor with a background also from IDEO. We will have Emmanuel Marot, and he's one of my personal favorites. He's developed a company, Lending Robot, which is a company focused on selecting notes on the lending platform based on an algorithm intended to build portfolios based on a super simple strategy of going from relatively conservative to aggressive. So they set up this company that has the sole purpose of building portfolios of notes from Lending Club. And Emmanuel, he's the one who's been working with Danny Lange in Microsoft, and he's got very many insights into the machine learning and AI space as well. So overall, you see the timeline of the webinars and the visit to the Silicon Valley in September. So we'll start off with Beirut in April, and then Danny will be on in May. Stanford D-School will be in June, Emmanuel Marot in August, and then the actual immersion into Silicon Valley will be in September. We have a tentative program, and as it is right now, it's divided into two tracks, a track for the startups and entrepreneurs from large companies, and a corporate track. Depending on the participation, we might be mixing these, but there will be some joint session and separate sessions for the corporates and the startups / entrepreneurs. And this is the overall picture of the schedule. There will be visits with some thought leaders on Monday, visiting potentially the Institute for the Future, pitch sessions for the entrepreneurs and startups. And moving on to Tuesday, there'll be the opportunity to meet with some of the local successful Danish entrepreneurs over here in Silicon Valley. And we will be meeting with some of the large FinTech innovation labs, could be Visa Innovation Lab. And moving on to Wednesday, we will be having a creative problem-solving workshop. And all of that will end up Friday with a pitch event where the startups and the entrepreneurs get the opportunity, based on the learnings from the full week of immersion, to test their learnings in a pitch event. We are a public institution, so the purpose for us is not to make money. We work for Denmark in that sense, so we need to have cost recovery. And the intention is that there is a differentiated price, so a price for the corporates and a price for the startups. A price for up to 2 participants for the corporates is 59,500, and for the startup, also with two participants, will be 19,500. So in essence, the corporates will be paying a higher price. We believe that that's the only fair way to do it. And as a member of Copenhagen FinTech, and signing up before the early bird ends on May 10th, there will be a 25% discount applied to those two prices. So this concludes the presentation. The aim is for you, if you're interested, to apply before May 10th, and that's when we have the end of our early bird sign up. If you haven't been here before, I've not met anyone who get back from Silicon Valley without this. Wow, I mean, this is really a different place where things work differently. So I can guarantee you, as a corporate, you will also return with that feeling.
Thanks, Anders. Give me a hand.